Everyone in the neighborhood knew her as a quiet, gentle woman, always smiling politely, always helping when someone asked, always blending into the background, and no one ever suspected the storm that was quietly brewing behind her calm exterior. Because on the surface, everything seemed perfect. Her husband appeared charming, successful, and attentive, and she seemed to have the life every woman wished for. But inside, she carried a secret wound, a betrayal that had cut so deep that no words could heal it, and it all began months ago when she discovered, quite by accident, that her husband had been lying to her, hiding meetings, texts, and late-night calls that she knew instinctively were not innocent. And at first, she felt shock, disbelief, and anger that nearly consumed her every waking moment. But slowly, as the days passed, that anger transformed into a quiet, simmering determination because she realized that confrontation would not bring the satisfaction she secretly craved, that revealing his lies immediately would only give him the upper hand. And so she began to plan carefully, methodically, almost surgically. Observing his habits, tracking his movements, documenting his lies without ever letting him sense a change in her demeanor, all the while pretending to be the same loving, devoted wife she had always been, smiling at him in the mornings, laughing at his jokes, complimenting his accomplishments. While deep down, a strategy was forming, one that would make him realize the depth of his betrayal without any words being spoken prematurely. And she started small, testing his reactions, planting subtle truths in conversations with his friends, watching as he flinched in ways only she could detect it. And in those moments, a strange mixture of satisfaction and anticipation began to take root inside her, because she knew the time for her carefully orchestrated plan would come. And when it did, the results would be shocking, irreversible, and unforgettable. And as she sat late at night, reviewing notes, memorizing every detail of his patterns, every weakness, every insecurity he never even knew he had exposed, she allowed herself a tiny smile, knowing that she held all the cards now, and that the day of reckoning, the day when he would finally see the consequences of his actions, was closer than he could ever imagine. And in that quiet, almost eerie preparation, she felt more alive than she had in years, because for the first time since the betrayal, she was no longer a victim. She was the architect of her own justice. And the suspense of what was to come filled her with a combination of fear, exhilaration, and anticipation, a tangled mess of emotions that only someone in her position could ever understand. And as the nights grew longer and her plans more detailed, she realized that this was more than revenge. It was a revelation, not just for him, but for herself, a test of patience, intelligence, and willpower, and she was determined to see it through to the very end, no matter the cost, because the moment she struck, it would be unforgettable, undeniable, and shocking in ways that no one, including him, could ever anticipate. As days turned into weeks, her plan began to take shape with a precision that surprised even herself, because every interaction, every smile, every casual word exchanged with her husband was now a tool in her carefully constructed strategy, and no one in their social circle suspected a thing. Not her friends, not her family, not even him, who continued to act as if everything was normal, completely oblivious to the fact that the woman he thought he could deceive so easily was now observing him with the keen eyes of someone who had learned every secret, every lie, and every hidden motive. And in her quiet moments alone, she documented everything meticulously, noting the times he said one thing and did another, the faces he made when he thought no one was watching, the subtle tremor in his voice when he tried to cover a lie, and the reckless confidence he displayed when he believed he had the upper hand. And she realized that she now had a map of his weaknesses, a blueprint of vulnerabilities he didn't even know he possessed, and she began to manipulate the small events around him, planting ideas, arranging coincidences, setting up situations where he would reveal his true self without realizing it. And the thrill of anticipation grew with each passing day, because she knew that patience was her greatest weapon and that the perfect moment would arrive when all the pieces of her plan aligned perfectly. And when that happened, he would be utterly unprepared for the consequences, and the revelation of his betrayal would hit him with the force of everything he had taken for granted. And in her mind, she rehearsed every scenario, every reaction, imagining his shock, his regret, except the disbelief on his face as he finally understood the depth of her awareness and intelligence. and it gave her a strange sense of empowerment, almost like reclaiming a part of herself that she had thought lost the day she discovered the lies. And she began to notice subtle changes in him. Tiny slips, nervous gestures, moments of hesitation that confirmed her suspicions were correct, that he was beginning, albeit unknowingly, to feel the pressure of her silent scrutiny, and it delighted her to see that the invisible web she had woven around him was working. That her careful planning was yielding results, and yet she maintained the appearance of normalcy, laughing at his jokes, preparing his favorite meals, offering him the warmth and affection he expected, all the while knowing that the true storm was brewing just beneath the surface. And every evening, and as she sat in quiet contemplation, she allowed herself to imagine the exact moment when the culmination of her efforts would explode into a reality he could not deny, and the thought of that moment filled her with a mixture of fear, excitement, and undeniable satisfaction. And because she understood that this was not mere revenge, it was justice, poetic and inevitable, and she would watch, silently and patiently, as he finally faced the truth, completely unarmed, completely exposed, and completely shaken to the core by the consequences of his own actions. And the knowledge of that inevitable confrontation made her nights restless but electrifying, because she was no longer living in the shadows of betrayal. She was now the orchestrator of a revelation that would leave everyone around them stunned and speechless. The days that followed felt like a careful dance, each step measured, each move deliberate, because she now understood that timing was as crucial as the plan itself, and she began to orchestrate small, seemingly accidental events that would slowly unravel his sense of control. From casual mentions of people he thought he could impress to carefully staged encounters that would test his honesty. And with every interaction, she observed the cracks forming in his facade, the subtle betrayals of guilt that he could not completely mask. And it thrilled her to see him squirm ever so slightly, unaware that he was falling perfectly into the trap she had meticulously laid out. And yet she never allowed herself to lose composure, never let a flicker of her intentions escape her smile or her tone. And because she knew that the power of her revenge was in the silence, in the quiet observation, in the knowledge that he had no idea what was coming, and she began to imagine the exact moment when she would finally reveal her awareness, a moment that would be as public or private as she chose. And that would strike him with the full weight of everything he had taken for granted. And in these days of preparation, she discovered something else about herself, something she hadn't expected. A strength and clarity that came from planning with precision and in these days of preparation, from seeing through deception and taking control of her own narrative. And she felt alive in a way she hadn't for years, because for the first time since the betrayal, she was not reacting, she was acting, and every subtle gesture, every word she carefully selected became a piece of a larger puzzle. A puzzle that would one day snap together in a way that would leave him speechless, bewildered, and irrevocably changed. And as she walked through her daily life, interacting with him as if nothing were wrong, she noticed how the tension between them grew. An invisible thread of suspense connecting them, and it exhilarated her to see that he was beginning to sense, without knowing exactly why, that the woman he thought he could deceive was far more perceptive than he had ever imagined. And with each passing day, the anticipation built, but it not just in her mind, but in the way he reacted, in the hesitation in his eyes, in the subtle avoidance of certain topics, all signs that her silent strategy was working perfectly. And she knew that soon, very soon, the culmination of her planning would arrive. And the moment of revelation would be unforgettable, shocking not only to him, but to everyone who thought they knew the truth about their seemingly perfect life. And she could almost taste the satisfaction of that moment, a mix of triumph and vindication that validated every sleepless night in Osto, every careful observation, every tiny maneuver she had executed in complete secrecy. Because when it finally happened, the world she had so carefully observed and lived in would shift, and the man who had betrayed her would finally understand the full extent of her awareness, her intelligence, and her unstoppable determination. And it was that knowledge, more than anything else, that filled her with a quiet, powerful exhilaration that no one, not even him, could ever anticipate. The tension between them had become almost palpable, an invisible current that hummed through every shared glance, every casual conversation, and every moment of silence, because she had mastered the art of subtle manipulation. planting tiny seeds that would grow into undeniable proof of his own wrongdoing, and she watched as his confidence wavered. The bravado he had worn so comfortably, for months now cracking under the weight of unspoken truths. And she delighted in the little moments of uncertainty she could detect in his posture, the fleeting hesitation in his speech, the way he occasionally glanced over his shoulder as if sensing her scrutiny, and yet she continued to play the perfect wife, the devoted partner, never letting a shadow of suspicion cross his mind, laughing at his jokes, preparing his favorite meals, responding to his stories with the right amount of warmth, all while knowing that the perfect storm was building quietly beneath the surface, a storm that he had no idea was approaching. And in the quiet of her own room, she meticulously reviewed every detail of her plan, imagining how she would reveal the truth in a way that would leave him stunned, speechless, and undeniably aware of the consequences of his betrayal. And she realized that this process, this patient and deliberate preparation, was not just about revenge. It was about reclaiming her power, her dignity, and the respect that had been chipped away by months of deception. And every subtle maneuver she executed brought her closer to the moment when she could confront him with undeniable evidence, a moment that would shock him so deeply that he would never underestimate her again. And as she watched him go about his daily routines, oblivious to the storm she had orchestrated, she felt a strange mix of exhilaration and fear, because she knew the closer she came to the climax of her plan, the more unpredictable the outcome could become. And yet that unpredictability only heightened the thrill. Because she understood that real revenge was not about violence or confrontation. It was about strategy, patience, and timing. And she had honed each of these skills to perfection, preparing for the day when the culmination of her careful planning would explode into a reality he could not deny. A revelation so powerful and shocking that it would leave him reeling in the satisfaction of knowing she had orchestrated it all, silently, invisibly, while maintaining the mask of normalcy, filled her with a quiet, almost intoxicating sense of triumph. Because she understood that the moment of reckoning was near, and when it arrived, it would not only expose his betrayal, but also reaffirm her strength, intelligence, and resilience. And in that anticipation, she felt more alive than she had in years, because for the first time, she was no longer powerless. She was the architect of her own destiny, the creator of a revelation that would leave him and everyone around them utterly shocked and speechless. And she could hardly wait to see the look on his face when he finally understood that the woman he had tried to deceive was far more formidable than he had ever imagined. The day finally arrived, the moment she had been meticulously preparing for, and everything unfolded with a precision that even she could hardly believe, because after months of observation, planning, and quiet manipulation, she was ready to reveal the truth in a way that would leave him utterly speechless. And as he entered the living room, unsuspecting, smiling as if nothing had changed, she calmly greeted him, her voice steady, her expression serene, giving no hint of the storm that was about to erupt. And slowly, deliberately, she began to recount the events, the lies, the betrayals, each word chosen with surgical precision, each revelation hitting him with the force of undeniable evidence. And he froze, the confident facade he had worn for months crumbling in an instant, because he realized, too late, that every detail he had hidden, every secret he thought was safe, had been quietly documented and orchestrated into a revelation he could not escape. And as she continued, she revealed not just the betrayals, but also the small, clever manipulations she had planted along the way. The subtle tests that exposed his guilt, the tiny traps that proved his lies. And with every word, every pause, every look, the shock on his face grew more profound, until finally, he could only sit in stunned silence, realizing that the woman he had underestimated, the one he thought he could deceive with impunity, had outsmarted him completely, and the magnitude of his own actions, reflected in her calm yet devastating presentation, hit him harder than anything he had ever experienced. And in that moment, she allowed herself a quiet, triumphant smile, reflected in her copitas, not out of malice, but out of the profound satisfaction of justice perfectly executed. And as he struggled to comprehend, to apologize, to explain, she stood firm, unwavering, because this was no longer about anger or revenge. It was about reclaiming her dignity, proving her strength, and demonstrating that the truth, when carefully revealed, could be more powerful than any confrontation, and as he sat there, speechless, the reality of what he had lost and what he had taken for granted settled over him like a weight. He could never lift, and the neighborhood, the friends, even the family, who had always seen them as a perfect couple, would later hear the story and be equally stunned, because the result was truly unbelievable, a revelation so shocking, so complete, that it changed the dynamic of their relationship forever. And in that final, unforgettable moment, she realized that months of patience, careful observation, and silent determination had culminated in a triumph that was both satisfying and liberating, proving beyond any doubt that intelligence, strategy, and resolve could turn betrayal into the most powerful story of redemption and revelation, leaving everyone, including him, forever changed by the outcome of a plan that had been hidden in plain sight all along.